All right, let's talk about the Delhi Sultanate. You know, when we think of massive medieval empires, this one sometimes gets overlooked. But for over 300 years, it was the powerhouse on the Indian subcontinent, and it completely shaped the course of history there.
So that really begs the question, right? How on earth did one empire manage to dominate the Indian subcontinent for more than 300 years? I mean, think about it. This is a region with just incredible diversity, so many different cultures, languages, and powerful local rulers. How did they hold it all together for so long? What was their secret?
Well, the answer is actually pretty fascinating. It wasn't about one single unchanging empire. The key to understanding its long run is to think of it like an epic saga in 5 parts. Each part, or chapter, was written by a different ruling dynasty. Okay, so before we get into the nitty-gritty of these ruling families, let's zoom out. Let's get the 10,000-foot view. What exactly are we talking about here? In a nutshell, the Delhi Sultanate was this late medieval empire, and its home base was the strategic city of Delhi. You can think of Delhi as the hub of a giant wheel. From that center, its power and influence just spread out across huge parts of the Indian subcontinent, leaving a massive mark on the region's history. And I want to put a number on this, just to let it sink in. We're talking about 319 years, from 1206 all the way to 1526. So yeah, this was no flash in the pan. This was a seriously powerful and deeply rooted empire. And the scale? Just huge. If you look at a map today, its territory would cover big chunks of modern-day India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh. So yeah, we're really talking about a true subcontinent-spanning empire. So you gotta wonder, how did an empire this big, that lasted this long, actually work? Well, it all comes back to that idea we mentioned earlier, the 5 chapters. Let's break down that framework. Okay, this timeline really tells the story. You can see the baton being passed from one dynasty to the next. It all kicks off with the Mamluk dynasty. They're the ones who built the foundation. Then you get the Khalidis, who came in and really pushed the borders out with some aggressive expansion. After them, the Tughlaqs had this long, stabilizing rule. That was really the empire at its height. And then you have the final 2 chapters, the Sayyid and Lodi dynasties. Their reigns were a bit shorter, and they basically managed the empire's slow fade. So see, 5 different families, but one single continuous story. All right, let's dig into the first act of this story. We're going to look at those first 3 dynasties. This is really the rise and consolidation phase, where the Sultanate was born, grew bigger, and hit its absolute peak. So the first couple of 100 years, all about these 3 families. First up, the Mamluks. They actually started as military slaves, can you believe it? And they established the whole thing, ruling for a solid 84 years. Then came the Khaljis. They were only in charge for about 30 years, but wow, did they make an impact. We're talking pure, ruthless ambition, pushing their armies way down into southern India. And finally, the Tughlaqs took the reins for almost 100 years and stretched the empire to its absolute biggest. But you know how it goes with great empires. What goes up must come down. After that peak, things started to shift. And that brings us to the final 2 dynasties of the Sultanate, the period of transition and decline. And here's where we get to the final act, the Sayyid dynasty. They took over when things were getting pretty messy and the empire was starting to break apart. They kind of just held it all together. Then you have the Lodi dynasty. Their big problem was internal drama, lots of family feuds and conflicts, which, as you can imagine, left them pretty vulnerable. And that's what ultimately brought the curtain down on the whole Delhi Sultanate era. Okay, so let's zoom back out. We've gone through all 5 dynasties. When you look at the whole 300-year epic, what's the big takeaway? Honestly, if you remember just one thing, it should be that number. 300+ years. The staying power is just incredible. For 3 centuries, the Delhi Sultanate was the main political and military force on the subcontinent. No question. And its legacy? Well, it shaped the region for centuries to come. So, in the end, the big idea here is that the Delhi Sultanate wasn't just one single static thing. It was this incredibly resilient, continuous empire that was passed down kind of like an inheritance from one family to the next. It was these 5 different chapters that, when you put them all together, create this one amazing story that lasted for over 300 years. And that kind of leaves us with one last thing to think about. This whole story, with its 5 dynasties, shows us both sides of the coin, right? Incredible strength and resilience, but also eventual decline. It really makes you wonder, where's the tipping point? What does it actually take for a powerful dynasty to finally fall and for a massive empire to just fade away?